and welcome to a special Educators Amplified gubernatorial edition. If you are listening via the radio, you still have time to come down to the beautiful Miramar Theater, 2844 North Oakland Avenue, or listen via News Talk 1510 AM WRD.com. I'm going to turn this over to our own Busted Pencils, Tim Slecker.
Thank you, Earl. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Welcome,
sir.
everybody. Busted Pencils, fully led at education talk. And here comes Mahlon coming up there. Welcome, everybody, to Hour 2. Hour 1, lots of great information. Everybody, make sure you're doing your best to evaluate what you're seeing here today, because it's extremely important for the candidates, for everybody to know. And getting right in, though, I want to make sure that we have all the time for the three gubernatorial candidates to introduce themselves. So, Dana, we'll start with you. Quick introduction down the line, and then I'll get right to the questions.
I'm Dana Wachs. I represent Eau Claire in the state legislature. I've been a trial lawyer for 32 years, but I'm taking medication for that. And I'm running for governor because I think, A, I can win this race. I can beat Scott Walker coming from the northwest part of the state. I'm going to bring in a lot of votes that we don't normally get. And number 2, we've just got to make sure this state changes in terms of education policy, environmental policy, and economic policy. That's why I'm in this race. These are the things I believe in.
Mike?
I'm Mike McCabe. I'm Mike McCabe. I was born and raised on a farm, spent most of my adult life working as an independent watchdog, working to expose and break the grip of big money influence in politics and work to get regular people in the driver's seat of our government.
Mahlon?
Thank you for that applause. My name is Mahlon Mitchell. I'm sorry for being late, but I was actually sitting down at a coffee shop with some potential voters earlier this morning. But I am happy to be here. I ran for lieutenant governor in 2012, where I got 1,156,000, I think 520 votes ish. And I say that because I know the threshold it takes for us to actually win. I am a firefighter by trade. I actually still am a firefighter. I'm an officer downtown at Station 1 in Madison, Wisconsin. I grew up in Delavan, Wisconsin. I was born in the Mill. I was born in Milwaukee here. But I grew up in Delavan, Wisconsin, which, if you didn't know, is between Lake Geneva and Janesville. I actually went to the same high school. Speaking of education, I went to the same high school as Governor Walker. And we graduated from the same high school, but he's 10 years older than I am. And we obviously took some different classes and learned some different lessons. But I'm happy to be here and ready to get some questions from teachers and folks. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, just to remind everybody, thank you all for coming. And again, the education forum here that we are really going to be talking about, and your best answers. And we're going to try, though, as best as we can, let's get these answers going pretty as clear as we can. And my first questioner, Joanna Rosado, please come on.
So I'll kick it off with the first topic, which is testing and standardization, okay? School accountability measures based on standardized test scores has been the only reform that education policymakers have been committed to for 20 years. The recently released NAEP scores indicate that even with this decades-long focus, scores remain flat. Do you believe we should continue test-based accountability, and why? So who'd like to start?
Let's begin with Dana.
You know, the thing about testing is that you put together a system like that, and pretty soon people are teaching to the test. So what if anything is actually being represented by the results of the test? I think that, I think that brings skepticism into the system. And to be quite frank, I think we are relying too much on testing. And to be quite frank, I think that while we need to make absolutely certain that folks are learning what they're supposed to learn, we have a system right now where teachers are not given the resources that they need. They're not given the respect that they need. And the system is broken in that respect. And this needs to be turned around, and that's something that's going to be a priority when I'm governor.
Thank you.
I really have reached the point where I think the best single thing that we could do for schools is to keep state and national politicians as far away from them as possible. We're testing kids to death. I heard Tony Evers say earlier that it's just one day a school year. Any teacher in the room knows that that's not the case. We're putting teachers in a position where they're set up to fail. We're not allowing them to use their professional expertise. They already know how to evaluate student performance. But instead, we've got politicians in league with private for-profit testing industries that are driving this agenda into schools, making teachers teach to the test, making them spend an awful lot of instruction time preparing kids for the test and then administering the test. We got to let teachers teach and students learn and trust professional educators to evaluate them properly. We need to do an about-face, a full turn in terms of how we deal with what goes on in the classroom and how student performance is evaluated.
Thank you.
Mahlon?
We are testing our kids too much. I think we all have said that. There's too much focusing on measuring outcomes. And we talk about the achievement gap, right? African-American kids not doing well as white kids. We talk about now they call it the opportunity gap, I believe. To me, it's a gap, and a gap is a gap, and you have to fill it. I have two African-American kids that are in school. I have a freshman at UW Oshkosh. I have a son who's in public schools in 8th grade. So, teachers aren't the end-all to cure or the end-all to everything. It's not the teacher's fault that there's an achievement or opportunity gap. The fault a lot of times lies in what's happening in our community. So if there's not opportunity in communities, if we're not actually taking care of fair housing and people and children getting the ability to eat before they go to school, if we don't have opportunities for their parents, if we don't have actually a minimum wage that is good for everybody, if we actually don't take care of our communities, then we're not going to fulfill the achievement gap, because the teacher can't be the babysitter, the teacher, the mental health professional, and everything else.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say thank you very much. We have
I didn't know I was going to get cut off, but now I know that I'll stop soon.
Well, what I want to hear is, it sounds like you guys you three candidates are saying you're not in favor of test-based accountability. What I want to hear next is, specifically, what would you do to eliminate that? Are you aware of, or can you speak to the 3rd through 8th grade mandated annual testing, the ACT that's required for every junior in our state, the school report card that is the reason that we are focusing on this in schools? Schools have been incentivized to measure student achievement, and the fact that student achievement is only defined by a literate or numerate standardized test score. So do you have a specific, very quickly, could each of you say specifically, how would you do that?
Well, for starters, running for governor here, and we can't make federal testing requirements go away, but we sure as heck can provide the leadership and the political will to move our state in a very different direction. And instead of creating, this testing is really being done to give politicians ammunition to scapegoat teachers and schools.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. And we can move that leadership in a different direction.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with that. I think that, there's an overemphasis of what teachers are doing in the classroom. Well, the reality is there's a myriad things that affect each and every one of these students. Teachers are professionals. Teachers are working as hard as they can to address the needs of their students. But the fact of the matter is, there are kids coming in destitute poverty. The fact of the matter is, kids are coming from dysfunctional homes often. And the fact is that, there's a myriad things that need to be addressed.
Right.
And just putting it on the laps of the teachers.
Right. And as
unfair.
teachers, we do know that, and people seem to understand that, but we're not doing anything. Mahlon?
If you don't have wraparound services for kids actually to be successful, if you don't put the ability for kids to be successful, then we're not going to change the achievement gap. We're going to keep having forums like this and talk about it, and nothing's going to get done. So we can't just keep talking about testing and everything. We actually have to do something about it. And if we keep having town halls like this and talk about the problem without identifying the problem, then we'll just keep talking about the problem.
All right, thank you. I'm going to actually move on to our second question. My name is Tanya Lohr. I am a teacher at West Bend West High School. I'm a social studies teacher. And my question will address the topic of the growing teacher exodus and the negative effects of dropping standards for teachers in an attempt to fix it. Wisconsin is experiencing a dramatic loss of educators due to bad working conditions, declining compensation, and loss of professional respect. Our current governor and legislature believe that the solution to the growing teacher shortage is to lower standards for entering and remaining in the profession, such that people can now become teachers in Wisconsin with absolutely no post-secondary education in teaching and no student teaching or other residency. What will you do to address the exodus of teachers from the profession and reestablish high standards for entering and remaining in the field of education?
Mike?
There's no question that teachers are fleeing. More veteran teachers are leaving early. Fewer young people are showing an interest in entering the profession by going into teacher training. That sets up our state for disaster in our schools. And you know, there are root causes. Part of it is compensation and the feeling that teachers have been devalued and disrespected. That's got to be addressed. Act 10 is not a sustainable policy for our state. It will lead to ruin. And then part of it is teachers being put in situations within increasingly unmanageable environments. We've got to lower class sizes and provide the support staff necessary to effectively manage those classrooms and allow good teaching to occur. And then part of it is the fact that teachers are forced to teach to the test and engage in this testing fetish that we have. All of that has created a demoralized workforce in our schools. And the response to that has been to say, okay, let's open new paths to entering the profession where you don't even have to have teacher training or in classroom experience. That's a disaster. Instead, we should address the root causes of the demoralization. And our own Department of Public Instruction has participated in opening those paths to teacher licensing without the proper professional training and without the practice teaching. That is not the right course. Instead, let's deal with the root causes of demoralized teachers, and that's compensation and disrespect.
Yep.
All right.
And create a good classroom environment for them.
Thank you. Mahlon?
I don't want anybody teaching my kids that does not have at least a bachelor's degree in teaching. We need to make teachers feel good about teaching again. Act 10 obviously was a huge detriment to that. But you're seeing teachers that don't, and when school districts don't have local control, they're not able to pay for essential services. So you have a place like Solon Springs, or where me and Governor Walker come from, Delavan, Darien, where they're closing actually down Darien Elementary School because they had a referendum that didn't pass, and now they have to close down the school. So we are doing a disservice to education when we're making teachers, we're pitting teachers versus school districts versus the superintendent and the principal. And at the end of the day, we all should care about the same thing, and that is the education of our children. The greatest commodity that we have in this state is our children, and their greatest currency is their education. So if we don't take care of them, then what the hell are we doing? So I will tell you this. We should not lead by having referendums to take care of schools. We should bring back the $1.6 billion that the governor took away in 2012 and 13. And we should restore that, and we should restore local control back to school districts so they know what's best actually for teaching their children. And that's what I would do as your governor.
All right, thank you. Dana?
Number one, the teachers need to be paid more. There's no question about it. Number two, they need to be able to protect their profession. When collective bargaining went away, teachers lost the ability to protect their profession, and they lost any and all autonomy or sovereignty that they had. That's terrible. And I come from Eau Claire, and you go to places like Eau Claire and La Crosse, and you watch the trail of teachers. Minnesota is functionally mining our teachers. They're coming over. I mean, that's the mining that's going on. They're coming over and taking our teachers and taking them to Minnesota. And that's because they don't get respect here, they don't get paid here, and they can't control their own profession. The other thing is we need to maintain certification and licensure. I mean, this is a profession. We need to know that the people that are teaching our kids know what they're doing. And Governor Walker's constantly after that. I mean, he's doing that to teaching, he's doing that to electricians, he's doing that to plumbers. Can you imagine? So just letting the market be the bearer of these things is not functional reality. We need to make sure there are certification and licensure, but we also need to make sure that there aren't any speed bumps in the way of if a teacher retires after 20 or 30 years of teaching one subject, they should be able to come back and teach a different subject because they've had 30 years of experience. So there needs to be some recognition of that in this licensure as well. We need to make sure that we keep confident and qualified teachers.
Our next questioners, Marva, Herndon, and Gil. Oh, go ahead.
Great segue, but in connecting it with Mahlon, though. So one of the issues that we have right now is we have 40 teachers in Delavan Darien with licenses that will not be hired back next year. And so I ask, how do we get them reemployed into the school districts where they're needed? And
well, why won't they be hired back, I guess?
According to the news, because
there's closing.
Yeah, because of school closing. And so there we have well over, and I've talked to at least 20 of them that are willing to, quote, move where there are teaching jobs, but they have 15 years and a master's degree, and other school districts can't hire them back. And I like where you were going, Mr. Wachs, with that idea of hiring back people with the professional credentials, but
and I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry.
It's Tim Slecker.
Okay, Tim, if we had collective bargaining, if teachers still had control of their profession, those folks would likely be able to find a job pretty quickly with that kind of an experience. The functional reality is, one, we're not funding our school systems the way they need to be funded. We need to bring back the money that Walker's pulled out of it. Number two, we need that collective bargaining. That's the only way teachers can protect themselves in the real world. And that's what we need to do.
Tim, this is exactly why we have to raise standards rather than lower them for teacher licensing and preparation. Because the reality is, if we go down this path of these alternative paths to teacher licensing, what that's going to do is bring a whole bunch of people who are at the bottom of the salary scale into schools, and the people who have a master's degree and 20 years worth of teaching experience are going to be too expensive for schools to hire, and they're going to go for the people who have less preparation or who come in who can be had cheap. That will lower the overall, not only the status of the profession, but the pay in this profession. And I come from an area, I was just in Delavan, and that people were pouring out their hearts about Darien Elementary School.
You can't go there without asking me to go there.
But, Dorchester Elementary School is closing too, right where I grew up. And it's going to cut the heart out of that little town because that's a hub of community activity. But those experienced teachers are going to have to go out there and compete with people who are being given an alternative path and are going to come in at a much lower salary.
Good. So Mahlon, real quick, because it's your district. So what, these teachers, hire them? What are we doing with them?
Well, you have to hire them. And I know we want to talk about that. We don't have collective bargaining, but we don't have collective bargaining in our state. Right. So a governor's going to have to come in and do something immediately. And immediately what we can do is actually hire them. Okay. But I'll tell you what another problem is that we have teachers leaving school districts because of merit pay. So they're actually going from school district to school district, and eventually they're leaving our state, going to Illinois, going to Minnesota, because they are trying to leave these school districts to see where the highest salary is, and eventually they're leaving the state. So that's an issue.
Well, and that's it. So let's keep our teachers in the state. Next question up is, come on.
Okay, Marva Herndon, and I'm not a teacher. I don't think I clarified that earlier. I'm a computer programmer by profession, so I crunch those numbers. My question specifically, as we're pushed for time, is our organizations had a financial study completed at the City of Milwaukee of their charter program, and what we learned out of that research was that the City of Milwaukee holds the debt for MPS. May I say that again? The city holds the debt. So all of this legislation that was pushed by the Republicans in Madison and Governor Walker was aimed at Milwaukee. Now, that being the case, I'd like to know, do you have a solution to stop the financial destruction of MPS, thereby saving the bond rating for the city of Milwaukee? Because where MPS goes, the city is going to go.
Mahlon?
Well, I'll tell you this. First of all, thank you for your question. And I will tell you this. I believe that public dollars should go to public education. It's that simple. But we have had the voucher program for 26 years. There should never be a time where you have a voucher or a kid leave MPS, go to a voucher school, and the voucher school get that funding, and that child not make it at that voucher school, come back to MPS because they either got kicked out or given to another school, and now this MPS still does not get the funding, but they have to educate that child.
That is correct.
That is correct. So we are pitting ourselves against each other. And that's the root of the problem. The problem is that we are letting those who are fortunate among us take away funding from us, and then we are left worrying about the crumbs on the table or underneath the table. So you have executive directors, you have people that are presidents driving fancy cars and running voucher schools, but actually what's happening, where you have voucher school provisions lifted, where people that are actually going to voucher schools anyway, now those parents can now, they are already affording to send their kids to voucher school, now they're actually getting a subsidized voucher from taxpayers to send their kids to the same school that they are sending.
Okay.
So we need, I'm sorry. I'm getting fired up. I can't, I'm sorry.
I like that. That's good. Keep on. Stay fired up. I have a quick question based on what you just said.
All right.
Milwaukee is saturated with schools popping up everywhere. If you are elected, would you consider a moratorium on opening any of these additional charters and independent vouchers? If yes, thank you. If no, why not?
Well, I guess you kind of told me my answer, didn't you? No, the answer is yes. I mean, I was never in favor of expanding the vouchers outside of Milwaukee. Like I said, vouchers have been in Milwaukee for 26 years. What they have to do, though, and what they have to do, and we should not expand it.
Hey, Mahlon, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got to go to a break.
What the?
When we come back, we'll continue the conversation.
She asked me a question, man.
Hey, I got that, but we're doing live radio. We've got to go to a break. We'll come back. We'll continue the conversation. You are listening to a special Saturday edition of Educators Amplified, gubernatorial edition. Part one. Welcome back to a special Saturday edition of the Earl Ingram Show, Educators Amplified. And I'm going to turn it over to Tim Slaker.
Thank you, Earl. I appreciate it. When we were at break, we were talking about charters and choice, and we need to get Mike McCabe and Dana Wachs on that question. So charters, private charters, school choice vouchers, where are they going?
Am I next? Or
You want me
Yes,
to?
go ahead, Mike.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dana.
All right. Number one, I am against these voucher schools. I have been against these voucher schools from day one. I still cannot understand how this is constitutional, and I don't think it is. So I want to bring the interested parties to the table, and I want to start rolling this back. We can't afford two separate systems, education systems, and one of them is completely unaccountable. So I'm against that whole thing, flat out.
Actually, both, excuse me, I would like to interject that actually charters are unaccountable as well. And for the many people that know the work that Women Informed has done over the years, that they're supposed to be accountable. But there's no watchdog making sure that they are.
Are you talking about 2R or independent?
Yes.
The independent ones.
The non-instrumentality.
Yep. I know, and this has got to stop. We don't have the resources to divide with one accountable school system and one that's not accountable. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We're not funding adequately the public school system, which it needs to be our priority. It absolutely.
And the other thing too.
Marvin, let's allow Mahlon to respond.
I haven't.
All right, go ahead.
The other thing is about Milwaukee absorbing this debt. I think that was the first part of your question.
That was what I said. Yes, Milwaukee holds, the city of Milwaukee holds the debt for Milwaukee Public Schools. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that, I have been a proponent of Milwaukee all over the state. You can take a look at my voting record and you can see, we need to treat Milwaukee like St. Paul, Minneapolis is being treated by the Minnesota legislature.
Yes.
Milwaukee is succeeding in spite of what this legislature is doing to it.
Yes.
And to be quite frank, with the natural resources, the universities, the education system, the workers and the folks that live here, we should be the Seattle of the Midwest.
All right,
That's what Milwaukee
all right, we've got to let Mahlon respond.
Actually, Mahlon started.
It's McCabe,
Yeah, but
Mr. McCabe.
Oh, Mr. McCabe, yes, I'm sorry.
I'll take it again, though, if you want.
All right.
You do my part, huh, Mahlon?
Go ahead.
Hey, listen, there should be a simple rule for government. If a program works, keep it and fund it. And if a program doesn't work, get rid of it. And by that standard, we should end taxpayer-subsidized private schooling. We've been trying to fund two separate and parallel systems of education, and we're not doing justice by one, and that does heavily impact our state's biggest city. And we can't be successful as a state if our biggest city struggles. So we have got to stop siphoning resources away from community schools and badly weakening them. And instead, we got to accept the fact that this program's been around for 27 years. The promise was that it was going to boost student achievement, and it hasn't. Voucher students don't do any better than public school counterparts, and by some measures they do worse. The promise was that it would drive school improvement. It hasn't done that either. It's siphoned resources away from community schools and badly weakened them. We've got to deal with that reality, so we should end this experiment.
With that, I take it that all three of you say that you would put forth a moratorium against...
Gail, can you please repeat that?
I didn't hear what you said. I'm
please
sorry.
repeat that.
My question was, in the beginning, as Mr. Mitchell started, Milwaukee is saturated with schools popping up everywhere. If you are elected, would you consider a moratorium on opening additional charter or independent vouchers?
Well,
Dana?
Yes.
Dana's.
The only charter schools I support are ones that answer to an elected and accountable board elected by the people. And then if you end taxpayer subsidized private schooling, the proliferation of these new schools is going to stop.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, here, Dana, you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm against voucher schools. I'm against these independent charter schools altogether. I'm absolutely in favor of a moratorium. Frankly, we're going to start rolling this stuff back.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue Silverstein. I'm a welding instructor at Milwaukee Area Technical College and also an executive board member of AFT 212. In 2011, Walker cut 30% out of the technical college budget, and that brought us below 1988 levels. At the same time, our students are making tough choices about whether to buy food or books because of cuts in financial aid and student loan debt. The cost of providing free tuition for students who attend technical colleges would be $50 million. This is not much for success compared to the $1.2 billion that Walker spent on state correction systems in 2017. As governor, would you not only restore the funding that Walker has cut, but would you also establish free tuition for technical college systems?
We'll start with you, Mahlon.
So the answer is yes. The first budget of the governor, and I talked about that way back in 2012, that the governor took 30%, gave a 30% cut to tech college programs. I went to a tech college for a while. I will tell you this. So when you talk about school funding and putting together a plan for free tuition, my dad always, and I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders at the DNC convention. And I will tell you this. But my dad always said there are no free lunches. So here's what I would do with free tuition. And it's not free because of this reason. Someone's paying for it, but here's how I would make it free to the individual or the child. Like I said, I have a son that's in 8th grade, public schools. I have a daughter that's a freshman at UW Oshkosh. I have a plan where from 6th grade on to 12th grade, you have to fill so many community service hours that you actually have to fill these hours, and once you reach that threshold of hours, you get two years, whether you go to tech college or a four-year college, 2 years free of college tuition. And then, so from that time, they're going to be in their community. They're going to be helping out the elderly, helping their community, essentially paying it forward. So my son, if I let him play 12 hours a day of PlayStation, he would do that. But I'm not going to let him do that. We're not going to let any of our youth do that. We're going to actually have 2 years of free college paid for by you volunteering in your community. And once you actually go to your 2-year program or 4-year program, you're going to have a loan forgiveness program on the back end to pay for year 3 and 4 when you actually stay in the state for 5 to 6 years and actually pay taxes, raise a family, have a house, or whatever you want to do. So essentially, we're going to have our youth being involved in the community, paying it forward, have a sense of community, and actually, it's not free, they've earned that tuition. The state has actually paid them, they've earned it. So then, when they had the loan forgiveness program, they stayed 5 or 6 years. Now we're keeping people in our state, and we're actually having contributors to society of our state. So it's not free, but they're going to earn it.
Thank you. Dana, please.
Governor Walker cut $1 billion from K through 12, $784 million out of the universities, and $234 million out of the technical colleges. He's cutting off his nose to spite the face of the future of this state. This is outrageous. I mean, at the very moment that companies like General Electric are moving to Boston to be closer to research and top-notch universities, this guy's cutting off our future. We are going to make sure that we fully fund these educational systems. We are going to make sure of that when I'm governor. I can tell you that with absolute certainty. Secondly, we're going to make sure that everybody who wants to go to college or technical colleges can. I favor an approach more akin to the Minnesota approach, where you apply for your federal grants, you apply for Pell Grants and the like, and then we backfill what's needed to make sure that people get through their universities. We need to make sure that federal money is used up as well in this process. So it isn't on the burden of us all the time. I mean, Walker keeps turning down grants from the federal government. We want to make sure that we accept these grants. We want to make sure that these schools are available. And one last thing. We have rolled out a business development plan, which is somewhat complicated. Go to danawachs.com. But a key component of that is, A, we are going to refinance the student loans of anybody that wants them refinanced. We can free up hundreds of millions of dollars that is needlessly hamstrung by these high student loans. And number two, we're going to offer to refinance the student loans of kids and folks in other states, provided they come home to Wisconsin. We want to reverse the brain drain. We want to bring our people home, because right now they're leaving our state as fast as they can. We need to reverse that brain drain, and that's what we're fixing.
All right, thank you very much. Mike McCabe.
2 years of free tuition at a technical school is a good step, but I want to be more ambitious than that. I think it should be Wisconsin's goal to have debt-free education for everyone. And tuition is not the only cost of education. There's housing, there's books, there's food. And the goal should be debt-free education for everyone, and past generations made that possible. I worked my way through 4 years of college, and I came out with $770 in student debt. And today, the average student's coming out with $30,000 in debt, and I ran into a young woman recently with $150,000 in student debt. We have a state budget that spends more on prisons than the entire university system. So part of the answer is changing our priorities. That's why I've come out for fully legalizing marijuana. We got to stop locking up nonviolent offenders. And we've got to flip those priorities and spend more unlocking human potential than we do on locking people up. We've also got to restore tax justice. Total up all the state and local taxes we pay, the top 1%, the wealthiest 1% pays the lowest overall tax rate in Wisconsin. We've got to make them pay their fair share. And then apply that basic rule for government that I talked about. If a program works, fund it. If a program doesn't work, get rid of it. I talked about taxpayers subsidized private schooling needing to go. I'd also apply that rule to close the state's corporate welfare office, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Plow that money into investments in empowering working people and young people in our state, instead of trying to work magic from the top down and hope that some of what the rich are given filters down to the rest of us.
Thank you very much. Ted Craig, you are next.
I'm primarily asking about things maybe that aren't going on in the schools, ironically enough, but relate to education. The percentage of students in Wisconsin who are economically disadvantaged has more than doubled since 2000. There exists an almost absolute correlation between poverty, family health, and other socioeconomic factors in the educational success of our children. Yet public schools are often blamed for disparities in educational outcomes, like it's all the school's fault. As governor, what will you push for specifically to dramatically reduce poverty and racial disparities in wealth and income so that all Wisconsin's children have the opportunity to succeed?
Let's begin with Mike McCabe.
Part of the answer is changing our school funding approach. Right now, we focus solely on property value. We focus on the ability of communities to pay based on property value. And we've got to introduce student need into that formula. If a school is serving more young people who are coming to school hungry, or who are homeless, or who have developmental disabilities, or who are simply living in poverty, they need more resources to properly meet the needs of those kids. That should be built into our school funding formula. But then the other thing that we've got to acknowledge is that whatever problems exist in the community inevitably come to school. And scapegoating schools for problems that are being poorly addressed or not addressed at all in the community is simply scapegoating schools. It's not getting us close to making these inequities or these disparities, which are really savage inequalities, go away. So, yeah, we got to go out in communities and make sure that every worker's got a living wage and that there's health care for all. And we've got to empower people from the bottom up. I call it geyser economics. Economic prosperity gushes up. It does not trickle down.
Mahlon?
If we do not fix the income inequality, if we do not fix our healthcare system, if we do not fix the ability for teachers and workers to sit down at the table and be able to talk to their employer, or in this case a school district, about hours, wages, and working conditions, then we won't fix anything. I agree with Mike on this. The achievement gap is not the teacher's problem necessarily. It is about the community, and the community is funded by the government, and the government has to decide its priorities. We have a $77.1 billion state budget, a biennial budget, and that's a list of your priorities. So if every governor were to take education as one of their most important priorities, then we would do well. So I can tell you specifics. I will change the per pupil rate, because right now in our state, not every child is getting the same education. There are districts, there are kids that are not getting the same education as those districts that actually have money and that are thriving. And that's a problem. But again, we shouldn't be sitting here putting ourselves against each other, because we have to bring it all together, because education should be a nonpartisan issue. It shouldn't be about Republican versus Democrat. It should be about how do we build ourselves together? How do we rise together? And we only do that by making education our #1 priority, because that's our greatest commodity, and that's what I'm going to work on. So, but in order to do that, I'm sorry, I'm done? Sorry.
Yeah, yes, sir. Dana, please.
There are some inequities in our society that are outrageous, frankly. I am one of 2 Democrats on the WEDC board, which is something that needs great overhaul, if not disbanding. And I'm one of the 2 people that have been fighting this Foxconn thing, fighting it to their face. You know, this is the, I mean, what we're doing with that Foxconn development is going to be a ring around our neck, an anchor around the neck of this state. Instead of working on developing new businesses so that the economy of everyone can rise, we're putting $3 billion of state money, actually $3.6 billion of state money, and over $4.5 billion total taxpayer resources into a company buried deep within one industry. One company. Instead of that, go to danawachs.com. You can see that we've got a business development plan that calls for, I mean, if you took that $3 billion and put it into new businesses, you'd have 10,000 new businesses with $300,000 of seed money per business. That's the scope of $3 billion. It's outrageous. We need an economy that works. The only way we're going to get that is if we help with startups. Right now we're last. We're 50th in the nation in startups. We need to bring that up to first or second, and that's what we've got a plan to do. Secondly, we are going to bring unions back to this state. If you want an economy that works, if you want a robust economy, you need to make sure that the middle class has disposable income. Right now, that's not happening because of right to work, the end of collective bargaining, and prevailing wage. That's what we're going to do. We need to build this economy up so that everybody benefits from it. All ships will rise.
All right.
If the middle class is
Thank you very
supported.
much, Tim. We got 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank you everybody for coming. So in this last 5 minutes, and I've got my watch and my clock right here for this, but we want to give each candidate an opportunity, about a minute, though, as educators and people concerned about public education that have filled this auditorium today. Why should we get your vote? And we'll just start and go right down the road. Dana, please.
Many of the folks in my family are teachers. My mom was a public school teacher. My in-laws are professors, and my sisters are teachers. In fact, my sister Rochelle taught at a school just a few blocks away from here for many, many years. And, you know, what we need to do is we need to have policy that benefits people, policy that benefits human beings and not corporations. So what we're going to do when I'm governor is we're going to invest in human beings, in people. You know, it used to be that we had a legislature that cared about benefiting the most amount of people possible with their legislation. I'm in this race to help people. And what that means is we've got to have health care, we've got to have education that's top-notch public education, and we need to have an economy that's not rigged in favor of the billionaires, rigged against everybody else. That's not fair. If you want a vibrant economy, you've got to make sure that the middle class is enlarging, getting larger. We're the third fastest shrinking middle class in the United States, Wisconsin. We're right behind Louisiana. That's not our history.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
A lot of great ideas shared today about how to make schools better, but one thing didn't come up that is important to think about. 0.5% of the American population supplies 2/3 of the political money in elections. That's why teachers aren't being heard. That's why kids aren't being heard. That's why the voices of parents aren't heard in these education debates. It's because a few privileged, and wealthy, and well-connected people at the top get to do all the talking, and their wishes are granted by our elected officials. Bottom line is we're not going to have the schools that we want unless we deal with the cancer that's growing in the body of our democracy, and we're not going to get clean air and clean water from dirty politics, and we're not going to get good health care from a sick political system, and we're not going to get living wages from a dying democracy, and we're not going to get anything more than thoughts and prayers after each new mass shooting from elected officials, as long as elected officials are paid to take no other action. Working to cut the cancer out of our democracy has been my life's work, and that's something that we have to do if the voices of regular people are going to be heard, and if we're going to have a government that works for all of us and not just a privileged few.
Mahlon.
You know what? Everything that's been said here, I think we all agree with. But at the end of the day, in order to change anything, we have to win. And if we don't win, we're just having town halls like this. We're just coming together and having forums. And I have a plan to actually win this thing. We just opened an office in Milwaukee on Sunday on North MLK Boulevard. We have an office in Madison. We're going to be opening an office in Fox Valley soon. And that's so that we can get out and talk to people. I have a plan to get 50,000 more African Americans, people that look like me, out to vote. Because if we don't get blacks to vote, we will not win. If we don't do well, and winning is not just going to black churches every 3.5 years, overpromising, underperforming, and then saying, do it again. We have to actually win this thing. I've been endorsed by the operating engineers. If you didn't know, those are 10,000 men and women across our state that have actually built roads. They endorsed Scott Walker the last 3 times. So I brought them over. We have to talk to people outside of this room, outside of these 4 walls. If we don't do that, we don't win. This all sounds great, but we have to actually win this thing to get anything done. That's my plan. We're going to get out and talk to people. We're going to change this whole electorate. We're going to change this election. We've got over 49.1% every single time we've ran. I got 1,156,000 votes, 520 last time, and we're going to build upon that. Because I tell people, this all sounds great. We can talk about education. Let's talk about health care. Let's talk about our economy. But at the end of the day, we all may have came over here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. So let's work together. Let's bring people together. And if we don't do that, we're just talking. So we can't just keep talking about what's wrong with Governor Walker. We have to talk about what's right with us. And that's what I'm doing in this state.
Thank you very much. Give them a round of applause.
Give them a big round of applause.
They deserve that. And thank all of you.